And this is Ken Kraetzer at the Sports Page Restaurant in White Plains, New York, and we have our edition of the West Point Football Report. Tomorrow on Saturday, the West Point Black Knights are traveling out to California to play Stanford, number 15 in the country, the Stanford Cardinal, who we saw at Michie Stadium last year. And it should be a very interesting test. Second game of the Jeff Monken era, the Army Black Knights coming off a 47-39 win at home opening day against Buffalo. A very good team, a bowl team from last year. Army was impressive getting off to an early start and held on at the end. So it was a good win for the Black Knights, John.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing to me, Ken, was the fact that Army was able to balance its running attack with a very successful passing attack. They were 7 for 7. Angel Santiago was 6 for 6. A.J. Scher 1 for 1. That enabled them to open up the lanes up the middle and on the sides for the running game. And that was tremendously successful because they scored all 7 touchdowns with the run.
And Army was able to utilize pass plays to Ray Maples coming out of the backfield, a couple of big third down plays that helped break open the game. This was one where Army scored Larry Dixon 4 minutes into the first half on a 23-yard run. Then going forward, Tony Giovanelli, who I talked to at practice the other day, is from Illinois, scored on a 4-yard run with 10:41 left in the second quarter. And then just before the end of the half, Army went out to a 21-3 lead as Ray Maples scored on a 6-yard run. And Daniel Grokowski made the point after touchdown, his third of the half. And Army had a 21-3 lead at the half. But everyone was feeling pretty good about the game at that point, John.
They absolutely were. And the really nice feel-good story to me in this one was Ray Maples. Ray only played 3 games last year. The preceding 2 years, he gained over 1,000 yards each year. And last year, an injury sidelined him. And he had to work really hard to rehab, and he came back. And he had the key play that I thought was in the first quarter when he made a 39-yard grab, a reception from Angel Santiago. That changed the game. And, he finished with 2 receptions. He finished with the touchdown. He rushed 6 times. He is back, and that is a huge, huge advantage for Army.
Army's got 3 running backs this year who are seniors who have a chance to finish in the top 10 in Army's career rushing totals, and with Larry Dixon and with Terry Baggett, and then with Ray Maples. Ray Maples has twice run for 1,000 yards for Army. And it's interesting to see how he'll be utilized along with Terry Baggett. They both play the same, you might call it a halfback position with Tony Giovanelli as another running back, and Larry Dixon at the fullback. It'll be interesting to see how they do. Matt Giacinta has also been playing at fullback. So Army's got tremendous depth in the backfield with their quarterback, Angel Santiago. We saw a little bit of A.J. Scher moments in the game when Santiago actually lost his helmet in one play and had to come out of the game. And A.J. Scher went in. Scher was injured earlier this year and could not miss the first 2 weeks of the summer training, and therefore Angel Santiago was ahead of him in training. And so far, looks terrific running the ball. And as you said, John, he made all his pass plays this week.
Absolutely. The one thing that was concerning to me was the fact that on the very first drive of the game, he coughed up a fumble, and the opposition took advantage, came in for a touchdown on that one. But after that, he settled down. He did not throw an interception. He had a very successful game. And, he's the guy who's primarily a running quarterback. So for him to throw 6 for 6, now people are going to have to change their attitude about him. Now they're going to have to consider other options as to what he does and what kind of a threat he represents. All that is good for Army, because anytime you get the opposition wondering what to do, then you've got an advantage.
Absolutely. Second half was one where Army came out very strong. Larry Dixon scored on a 45-yard run where he broke open the play just 6 minutes into the third quarter.
And the neat thing about that one, Ken, was that one was right up the middle. There were many that broke to the side, but that huge run was up the middle. And after that, you just looked at it, and the fact of the matter is that Buffalo was so confused at that stage that I think that helped set the stage and enabled Army to build a very large lead.
Yes, and it seemed like it was a warm day. I was standing on the field most of the day, and it was probably about 85 degrees. And on the field turf, it was probably another 10 to 15 degrees. So it almost looked like the Buffalo defenders were tiring, which is what the Army option does to an opponent, because they're having to deal with blocking, a very aggressive blocking pattern on each play. So, but Buffalo came back. Joe Licata, their quarterback, really had a fine second half. He had the first of 5 touchdown passes to Devin Hughes. But then Army came back. Terry Baggett had a long run of his own, 41 yards for a touchdown, 3:30 to go in the third quarter. But Buffalo came back with another Joe Licata touchdown pass, 65 yards to Marcus McGill. So it was 34-17 at the end of 3 quarters, and it looked like it was going to be Army's day pretty easily. Army in the second half, in the fourth quarter, Angel Santiago completed a 11-play, 75-yard drive with a 4-yard run. And then Matt Giacinta, the fullback, also scored on a 4-yard run after on a short drive after an interception. But Buffalo then scored 3 touchdowns late in the game. Joe Licata, 3 touchdown passes in a row. First to Devin Campbell, then Marcus McGill, and Devin Campbell again. So the final score was 47-39. Army had to withstand a couple of onside kicks at the end as Buffalo tried to fight their way back into the game. But a solid win for Army. As the players all said, their goal for the day was to come away with a W, which they did. This was a very good Buffalo team, not to be underestimated. They were in a bowl game last year, and they are a good team in the Mid-America Conference. And just looking at a couple of stats on the day, Army ran for 341 yards. Buffalo had 153. Passing, Army had 125 yards, which is a good day for them. Anytime Army actually throws for over 100 yards, that's pretty good.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, they were 7 for 7 in the passing game, so they were effective at the short passes. Angel Santiago was hitting his receivers. And most importantly, in the sign of a veteran quarterback, he was finding his open receivers, finding Ray Maples out on the flat, which really worked well for them. Army, a total of 466 yards. Defense did give up 549 yards, which is a concern. In the Tuesday press conference, Coach Monken said they made mistakes, but they were correctable mistakes. The stat that really is glaring and really bothered Coach Monken, and I think all Army fans, is the number of penalties. 12 penalties for Army for 105 yards. A couple of personal fouls that Coach was upset about. And so that was something that could have made a bigger difference in the game.
Those personal fouls tended to be fouls of enthusiasm. You saw them either by a foul that was either a late hit or a foul that was as the player was going out of bounds. And it was a situation where the Army players play with such intensity that these things certainly happen early in the season, and it's the kind of thing that you hope as time progresses they're able to outgrow. They've done it in past years. I hope they do it again this year.
And just looking down some of the individual stats for Army, Larry Dixon ran for 174 yards and 2 touchdowns. Terry Baggett, 74 yards and a touchdown. And Tony Giovanelli, Angel Santiago, Ray Maples, and Matt Giacinta all had touchdowns for Army. Passing, as we said, Angel Santiago, 96 yards on 6 for 6. And Kelvin White, who had been a quarterback and was moved into a tight end type position this year, although he's a wide receiver a lot of the time. He went out and caught 3 balls during the game, and Ray Maples had 2 catches for 69 yards. One point we want to make sure we do mention are the interceptions that Army had. And Josh Jenkins, outstanding cornerback, 2 in the game, 15 yards, and then Chris Carnegie had an interception. That is a sign of the veteran leadership in the backfield defensively for Army, that they had 3 interceptions, caused 3 turnovers against a good passing team.
Well, the nice thing about that is that you saw that Army's defense was patient. They let the Buffalo quarterback set up a play They read where he was going to go, and they stayed with their receivers, and they didn't commit until they knew the quarterback was going to a certain receiver. That's why Jenkins did well. That's why Carnegie was able to pull in the pass. 2 interceptions by Jenkins is tremendous, and you could see the patience. You could see they would hang around like vultures and wait for the opportunity and then take advantage.
Absolutely. Now, we have Jack McGuirk here, who has been following some of the other academies and then also some of the opponents that Army will face during the course of the season. What's on the scoreboard, Jack?
Well, last weekend, Navy beat Temple 31-24. The quarterback, Keenan Reynolds, ran for 173 yards and had 2 rushing touchdowns. He also completed 4 of 8 passes for 30 yards through the air. Late in the fourth quarter, outside linebacker Chris Johnson intercepted a lateral pass to seal the win for Navy. They are now 1-1, and they are on the road against Texas State this weekend. Now, Air Force lost to Wyoming 17-13. Quarterback Cale Pearson completed 17 of 32 passes for 226 yards and rushed for 22 yards. Running back Jacoby Owens had 76 yards on 18 rushes and a rushing touchdown for Air Force. Now, Wyoming won the game on a 3-yard touchdown pass with just 58 seconds left in the game. Air Force is also 1-1, and they're heading to Georgia State this weekend. So Army, Navy, and Air Force all have tough road games this weekend.
Hey, Jack, thank you. And want to say hello to our host here at the Sports Page, and that is Bob Hyland. Bob is a former NFL player, having played for the New York Giants and also for the Green Bay Packers, where he proudly has a Super Bowl ring. Bob, good to see you, and always great to visit the Sports Page and talk Army football.
Thank you, Ken. It's nice to have you here. We're big fans of Army football, so we appreciate your deciding to have the show here tonight. That's
great, and you played your high school football for Stepanak and then played at Boston College. How is Boston College doing this year, setting up in the Atlantic Coast Conference?
They're doing well. They had a couple of down years going back a year or two. They brought in a new coach, and he's been recruiting well. And they did get to a bowl game last year, so we've returned to that. We had the longest streak in the country. We played in 13 straight bowl games, and it was interrupted about 2 years ago. But now we're back on track. So I think they're going to do well. I went up to the Army-BC game last year, as a matter of fact, and it was a terrific game. Dixon had a very big game for Army, and our rushing back, Andre Williams, had a great game as well. And of course, he was the Heisman Trophy candidate. So it was fun. I'm happy to see BC doing well and for Army to be back on track with their new coach.
Bob Hyland, proprietor of the Sports Page restaurant here in White Plains. Thank you, Bob. It's always good to visit and have a chance to talk college football.
Thank you for having me, Ken. I appreciate it.
Okay, and Army is traveling. They flew out to California today, and they are going to be playing the Stanford Cardinal. And as we say around here, yeah, that's Stanford. The guys that have played and won Rose Bowls in recent years, a rejuvenated program, as Sports Illustrated just wrote about them. And quite a challenge. We saw Army play Stanford last year at Michie Stadium, and it was an interesting game. And it was one that Army played, was very competitive early on, and it was very close going into the fourth quarter.
Absolutely. It was a 7-point game at the half, and unfortunately for Army, they wound up losing 34-20 in that game. But Coach David Shaw knew that his team was in a game because the fact is Army stayed incredibly close throughout the game, and it's only fourth quarter play that basically determined their victory. Now, remember, last year Stanford was one of the top 10 teams in the nation, so it was pretty good for Army to stay that close to them.
It was a game where Army ran the ball well. They ran for 284 yards last year against Stanford. Actually, the Cardinal had 197. Stanford threw for 205 yards, Army for 49, 13 of 22. So Kevin Hogan, the Stanford quarterback, who we'll see again, did a good job. And really a neat day overall. It was at the half. 20-13, a 7-point game at the half. And then Gaffney of Stanford had 2 touchdowns in the first and the third quarter, and then one early in the fourth quarter. And then Army came back on a pass by A.J. Schur to Edgar Poe for a touchdown that made it a 34-20 win. 39,644 at West Point for that game. The stands were full. It was kind of a day where Stanford had really promoted it to a lot of their East Coast alumni to come out and visit West Point, see the team. And so there were a lot of red shirts up in the upper deck and on the kind of the back rows of all the stands, as Stanford was very well represented. But this game tomorrow will be out at their new stadium out in California, which replaced a stadium that had held the Super Bowl, went back, I believe, to the 1920s. Torn down in one winter, and the new stadium was built virtually in about 10 months, so that they didn't have to play a season on the road. They must have spent a lot of money to get the construction done quickly. So, John, what do you think about this Stanford team that Army's going to play on Saturday?
Well, Ken, the good news for Army is that Tyler Gaffney, who was the great receiver in last year's game, he's no longer with the team. The bad news is that quarterback Kevin Young still is, and Young so far in the first 2 games has done quite well. The fact is that Stanford won its first game of the year with a truly devastating 45-0 victory over University of California, Davis. But then last week they lost 13-10, a close one to USC. And that's not good for Army, because when Stanford gets angry, especially when they're hosting a home game, that could be difficult for their opponents. So far, the Cardinals have been averaging 27.5 points a game and 437 yards in offense. And Young has completed 34 of 46 passes for 489 yards and 3 touchdowns. Their running game, their primary offensive threat there, is balanced by Raymond Wright, who leads the ground game with 88 yards, and Kelsey Young with 76, and also and a blast that many people may be familiar with, Barry Sanders. Only this is Barry Sanders Jr., who is their third running back. And so they have a very potent offense that way. Defensively, they're led by Blake Martinez and A.J. Tarpley, who each have 13 tackles so far this year. And they're, again, ranked in the top 20, so it will not be an easy game. And coming off that loss to USC, I think the Cardinal, and remember, we are saying Cardinal. That's not a mistake. It is singular. It is the only singular time that you're going to hear Cardinal in collegiate sport. But the Cardinal absolutely is going to be a very, very difficult game tomorrow.
Well, it's kind of a homecoming game for Army quarterback senior Angel Santiago, who is from the Southern California area. I'm sure he's going to have a big contingent of his family and friends at the game. He was saying that because of the Army training schedule, he didn't even get a chance to go home this summer. Yeah. They went right from the end of their spring classes in mid-May to doing their Army training, their military training that every cadet at West Point is required to do. Then they went into the weightlifting and strength building period.
And Ken, that's an interesting point, because Army has gained those 1,400 pounds as a team this year that over what it had last year. It's an average of about 14 or 15 pounds per player. And, I think both you and I agree that the game against Stanford physically was a devastating game for Army. It took more out of them last year, and that it took them quite a long while to get back. And they suffered quite a few injuries as the year went on, possibly because that game took so much out of them and they just didn't have that much in reserve. If they have extra weight, if they've built extra muscle, they probably are going to be better prepared for the long haul, for the full second half of the season. And as long as they can stay healthy, I think it's going to be a better team. I think they're going to give Stanford another close run, because they play a different brand of football than any other opponent that Stanford plays. And I think I'm not saying they're going to win, but I think that they are definitely going to make sure that everybody in California knows that they're in a tight football game. I think it's going to be close. I think the score is going to be closer to the USC score than it will be the 45-0 game against UC Davis.
Well, I think Coach Monken and his staff want to indicate that they can compete with the top 25 teams. They may not be ready to win consistently, but they want to say and show that they have raised the competitiveness of the Army football program, and to stay and play competitively against Stanford on the road is one of the ways that they can do that. So I think it'll be quite interesting to see how they do. Army needs to get ahead and hold on to the ball. They need to play perfectly. They can't fumble. One of the concerns is they had 2 pitch outs that were fumbled in the game against Buffalo. They've got to play error-free football. They've got to find a way to put some pressure on the quarterback, which was really limited. They tried some blitz packages in the first half, but by the second half, they were pretty much just dropping back into a prevent defense when they had the lead. And it looked like the 5 Buffalo linemen were just standing there in a semicircle protecting the quarterback who had plenty of time, Joe Licata, to throw. So we'll see what Army can do with that, but they need to do the 11, 12, 15 play drives.
And I think this is going to be another good opportunity for Jenkins and Carnegie to show what they can do in the secondary of the defense, because they had the interceptions last week. It gave them lots of confidence. You know that the quarterback Hogan is going to be throwing for this particular game, so they know that. And if they can be patient and position themselves and time themselves and look for how the game is, they could very well be game changers in this game. The way they play on defense could very well impact the outcome of the game.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about Army, and you look at the opening game, is that the 3 leading players on Army's defense and tackles are all sophomores, led by the inside linebacker, Jeremy Timp, who they are very excited about. He's not a big physical player, but he's very athletic and made 11 tackles, 9 solo in the game.
They were his first varsity tackles ever for Army football, so it certainly bodes well for his future.
And then Josh Jenkins, the cornerback, had a great game, 7 tackles. Andrew King, who is the second inside linebacker, he's from Queens, New York, had 7 tackles on the game. Hayden Pierce, the senior safety, had 6. Chris Carnegie, a cornerback, had 6 tackles. And Jeff Bacon had 5 tackles on the game. The linebacker from Harrison, New York, Stephen Riccardi, had 4 tackles on the game. So the linebacking crew were making a lot of plays, and Army is blessed now to have 2 seniors at the safeties in Bacon and Pierce, and 2 very I call them young veterans in Josh Jenkins and Chris Carnegie. Jenk at the cornerback, so that's something Army was playing for a number of years with a lot of freshmen and sophomores in those positions, and as they say, you don't win with freshmen and sophomores playing in college football. But because of the way the program has progressed, you're playing many more seniors. The whole front line is seniors this year, led by Mike Eugeni, the defensive tackle, and the 2 nose tackles, TJ Altamala and Richard Glover, both fine players, very aggressive. I had a chance to talk with Richard Glover during training, and he is a tough-as-nails guy. But he's a great student, is looking forward to commissioning in the Army next year, as all the Army seniors are. It's really fun to watch the center, number 53 for Army, Matt Hugenberg, who is 6'5", 309 pounds, which is a big difference. Army hasn't had a 300-pound starting offensive lineman in a while, at least since we've been covering the team the last 5 years.
285 pounds used to be about the largest that you could find at Army, and now there are quite a few players over that.
Yeah, well, the training, the challenge was just when they went to the summer military training to a man, they lost 20 pounds. And now what they did is they lost the weight early. They go into their strength and conditioning program, and they're able to put that weight back and then some. So as you said, the team gained 1,400 pounds. And then being able to have 2, a senior and a junior at quarterback, Angel Santiago, and more we hear Coach Monken talking about running the ball, that this is a running team. And we kind of thought maybe they were going to switch and be a little bit more of a mixed option offense with A.J. Sure, a very good passing player. But Angel Santiago has really looked good the opening week, and we'll see how he does playing on home turf in California at Stanford.
Absolutely, and I think that we saw a lot of basically a template of what we can expect for the rest of the season. I think you're going to see Army throw about 10, maximum 12 times a game. They're going to need to complete the majority of those to keep the opponent defense honest. And the University of Buffalo game was about as great as you can be, 7 for 7. And if they could do that again against Stanford, they'll be in the ballgame.
Yeah, last night we were down in Throgs Neck to watch the annual game between the two maritime colleges, New York Maritime College and Massachusetts Maritime. And it was a thriller, 31-30, with the game decided right at the end. New York Maritime took a safety in the final play to keep Mass Maritime from receiving a punt. And a very good game. We had a chance to talk with the New York Maritime quarterback, Zach Chilcott, who had a couple of touchdowns and looked good running the offense. As our friends coached by Clayton Kendrick Holmes, the U.S. Navy veteran, came back from trailing at the half 14-3 to win that one 31-30. Good crowd down there at the Maritime College in the Bronx. Always fun to visit over there. So, Jack, just tell us again, where will Navy and Air Force play this week?
Air Force is going to be at Georgia State, and Navy is headed to Texas State. So a couple of tough road games for both of those schools. Okay,
not quite Stanford, which is a challenge ahead of Army. Army will, as the first of 3 road games, are going to go travel to Winston-Salem and play Wake Forest, which is a very interesting game. I think just going into it, it's kind of a toss-up game. Army played a real close game down there 2 years ago. Last year, I thought they had a hangover from the Stanford game. Wake Forest came into Michie Stadium right after, the week after, and I thought Army just never really played as well as they did against Stanford.
I don't think Army played as well against anyone last year after the Stanford game. I think that Stanford game took more out of them than most people recognized and most people admitted. I think that this year they're better prepared, and you'll see not only them play Stanford well, but I think that will continue throughout the season, that they will continue to show that they're a very competitive team.
Okay, and so tomorrow at Stanford Stadium, which seats 50,360 people, their new stadium, the Army Black Knights will take on the Cardinal, and should be an interesting game. A big challenge for Army, but a great opportunity to show how this program has improved over the past year with the Jeff Monken era beginning, and the coaches and the different training regimen that they've been able to install at Army. That is a 5 o'clock Eastern time kickoff, and we have more interviews. If you go to our Facebook page, West Point Football Report, we had an interview we did this week with Army senior defensive tackle from Rochester, New York, Joe Drummond, and also have comments from Coach Jeff Monken on his trip to Afghanistan, which he did this summer to visit West Point alumni and all the troops in Afghanistan. He said what a great reaction he got. He called it a trip of a lifetime. So we'll have that up. Just go to Facebook, West Point Football Report. Love it if you liked it. Join our audience there. We have reports almost daily during the season on what's happening with West Point football. So for Jack McGuirk and John Chuhran, this is Ken Kraetzer for the West Point Football Report, a program of Sons of the American Legion Radio from White Plains Squadron 135 of the Sons of the American Legion. Tonight, broadcasting from the Sports Page restaurant in downtown White Plains, New York, hosted by our friend Bob Hyland. This is Ken Kraetzer, and we'll have another report for you next week. Just look for West Point Football Report on Facebook. Good night.